Good evening. This is Jesse here. Um I've had quite an interesting day today. Um it's been a bit of a wild day, but I've had some very deep revelations this morning when I woke up. I woke up around about 11. I got up. I was a bit bored, but I wasn't too keen on watching television. But I turned it on, couldn't watch, picked up a book, and I started reading. I didn't really read much, but what I read made a pretty big impact on me. This is the book that I was reading. A brief history of the Roman Empire, Rise and Fall by Stephen P. Kershaw. And I've been reading this book for a while actually, but I just finished the first chapter, and I got down to the next chapter, chapter 2, which is entitled Augustus, from teenage butcher to father of the fatherland. And in that chapter, it was really just talking about how Octavian assumed the role of the Roman emperor after Julius Caesar had died. Because when they killed Julius Caesar, they killed him because they wanted to preserve the republic. But Julius Caesar had put Augustus in his will to become his successor. So that meant that he inherited 2/3 of his estate. And in the previous chapter, it was detailing how he eventually came into the office that he came to when Cicero and the senators went and stabbed Julius Caesar to death on the Ides of March. And after his funeral celebrations, Augustus found out that he was made heir to Caesar's estate. Like I said, 2/3 of it, and was going to inherit what was his, but he had to go through Mark Antony, who was Caesar's general and friend, who didn't really trust him because he thought that he came to gain the successorship through dubious means, which is said to have been common back then in Roman times. But either way, he went about trying to gain his inheritance. And the way he did it was that he went to Cicero to make a deal with him to take his side and get rid of Mark Antony, because, like I said, they killed Caesar because they wanted to preserve the Roman Republic. And because they wanted to preserve the Roman Republic, they had to get rid of Caesar because Caesar was trying to make himself a king. Because accordingly, there was a prophecy that the Parthians, who were the people who succeeded the Persians out there in the east, there was a prophecy that the Parthia could only be conquered by a king in their sibling oracles. So Caesar knew this, and because he knew this, he wanted to become a king. So he was gonna he made himself dictator for life, so that after that, because now he was a king, he believed he could go and conquer the Parthians. And so that was his plan and his motive. But it didn't work. He had already gained far too much power among the Romans, and the senators were envious and jealous and offended with him. So not long after he had made himself dictator for life, they colluded and stabbed him to death. And so Cicero, knowing why they had killed Julius Caesar, was thinking to himself that since Octavian was a young man, because he was 18 years old at the time when Caesar died, and he received his inheritance from Caesar, because Caesar only had a daughter and a very small young son called Caesarion. whom he had by Cleopatra. And for whatever reason, he liked Octavian, so he wanted him to, take off after him. But like Cicero agreed to help Octavian inherit what was his, so that in doing so, after they've dealt with Mark Antony, because he was a danger, they would then just get rid of Octavian, because he, being young, should have been, or would be easy to deal with and get rid of. So Cicero thought it was a done deal and agreed to go and help Octavian put out Mark Antony. So they went, they colluded, they made an alliance, and then Octavian went to fight Mark Antony in a certain war. Eventually, Mark Antony and Octavian decided to make a truce after the war. And all that happened was that it was giving more power to Mark Antony, Octavian, and a third party called Lepidus, who was also a friend of Caesar. So their former was called the Second Triumvirate, because it was the first triumvirate, which was between Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, before Caesar eventually came up on top. So they formed the third triumvirate, and they power shared for a while. This person have this part of room, this person have that part of room, that person have that part of room, for so long, until they eventually kicked out Lepidus from the power sharing agreement, and it was just Mark Antony and Octavian. And so Mark Antony and Octavian were friends for a while because of this power sharing agreement. And Octavian made Mark Antony to marry his sister Octavia, and in vice versa, Octavian married Mark Antony's daughter Claudia. His marriage to Claudia didn't work out. It was never consummated, so he married another woman, and then eventually he married Livia Drusilla, who stayed his partner for the rest of his life. But because of greed, lust for power, eventually Octavian had it that Mark Antony was Mark Antony severed interest, and they started colluding against each other again. And eventually Octavian won when I believe on the 2nd of September 31 BC, they locked in war, and Mark Antony and his troops were defeated. And eventually him and Cleopatra, whom he had become acquainted with, both died, which was, I believe, the foundation of, or the origin of the story of Romeo and Juliet, how they died. But they both died and left only Octavian in power, from which point on, like I said, Cicero only agreed to help Octavian because he thought it was an easy deal to help the young man, so that they can sideline him afterwards and get back to the Republic. But after the war, and during all this process, like Octavian and Mark Antony made it that Cicero got murdered anyway. They took him out the way. They didn't like him. They wanted the power all to themselves. But after the war, and after Octavian had won, Octavian knew that the Roman Senate, they wanted to return the Republic. And so because he knew that they wanted to return the Republic, he couldn't go and directly exalt himself as Emperor of Rome. And so because of that, he hid behind subtleties. He was termed a consul for so long, and he had a second consul so that it would be like it's two people in power, not just him. And he did that for so long until someone tried to kill him and he got sick. And then he pulled back from being a consul and got given the title Tribunica Potestas, which is like the protector of the plebs, the common people. Which accordingly, from that point on, it was said that all the other Roman emperors who came after Octavian inherited the title to become emperor through that title, because it meant that he could veto whatever the Senate and the consuls were doing to rule the empire. And then from that point onwards, he got other titles as well. Since he was no longer a consul was like a top leader in Rome. In Roman government, there were always two consuls who ruled together, who shared power, who matched each other, so that law and order would be upheld, and one person couldn't become so powerful that he will rule of his own authority. Because the reason why Rome became a republic before him was because initially it was a monarchy, it was a kingdom, but one of their kings got too proud and got too keen of holding all the power and made a stupid decision. Then the senators downstepped and took him out and established what they called a republic. And they knew how much better that was. So when Caesar was trying to make himself dictator, they were keen to get rid of him. And so they were very keen to stay as a republic for their own good, for their own law enforcement and such. And so Octavian, after he was no longer consul, but in every sense he was the real ruler of Rome, after he was no longer consul, got given the title Imperium Preconsul. A preconsul was like a governor of a Roman province. So he still retained the title of like a consul, a ruler, even though he was no longer an actual consul. And then they'll put more accolades in him and more accolades in him, till by the end, he was like, you can't go hide him. And he named himself Augustus, which meant venerable, majestic, first citizen, the greatest and the best. Pretty much that was him. So the point was, Octavian gradually usurped power through tact and through subtlety, so that the Roman Empire, which was before a republic, was slowly but surely through him being turned into an empire and a renewed monarchy. But because the people didn't want that, he was making himself there slowly, sneakily, and subtly, and through a whole lot of largesse, which is a word for public generosity, great public generosity. He was buying bread for the people, giving out free money. He made himself very popular. Yeah. So that was what I was reading in the morning about Emperor Augustus Octavian, how he suddenly came to power and all that. I didn't know any of this. I just learned it recently, just then from this. And it made sense because I'd known a bit about Roman history, but how he suddenly reached himself into power through his subtlety. That's the part I didn't know, which was very clever. The man was a very smart man. He will get his will, but he won't let you know he's tricking you to get his will. So that was what I was reading in the morning. And then after I'd finished reading and had some breakfast, and I was just lying there thinking about it. Then some ideas started coming into my head. For example, Julius Caesar. I started thinking of astrological terms like zodiacal signs, because I'm born in July, and the month of July is actually named after Julius Caesar. So I pondered that kind of stuff a bit, and it crossed my mind that it was Julius Caesar who set things up for Augustus to become emperor. And that actually crossed my mind like a couple of days before, that the month of July is to be a bit vain. It's quite cool if the man who founded the whole Roman Empire was born in it. And that it implied that July-born people are pretty cool people, if that's the case. So then I was thinking about how Julius Caesar set up the kingdom so that Augustus could become emperor. And the month of August after July is named after Augustus, which was also said in this book also that I believe they said in 8 BC they renamed the month August after Augustus and called it August, just like the name July after Julius Caesar back right after he had died. Yeah, and so like I know the month of July, the sign for July is Cancer, and then the sign for August is Leo the lion. But then the sign for the month before, that's Gemini. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, it's pretty cool that it has to be that people with the sign Cancer must be some pretty powerful people if they could set things up in such a way that the next sign, the next month after, will have their power. Because Leo is like Leo the king. But it crossed me that even if there is Leo the king, it's obvious that Leo the king was made Leo the king by Cancer, the crab. The crab set everything up for the next stage. So the crab was very famous. And I was dwelling on that. And then I was also thinking religion, because this thought has been in my mind before, that because whenever I would read or learn about Julius Caesar, it makes me think, that man is just like King David in the Bible. He's just like King David. I don't know, but to me they are pretty much exactly the same, but in a different way. And then I realized that King David established the nation of Israel. And then right after he established the nation of Israel and he died, his son Solomon made it great and super glorious. So those ideas crossed my mind, and I linked the two of them. And I thought it interesting. Then I remembered, so when I noticed those two thoughts, then I thought to myself, in the Bible, before King David became king, there was King Saul who became king. But King Saul didn't retain the kingdom. So I was like, King David and Solomon and Julius Caesar and Augustus kind of match. But is that really as far as it goes? Then a thought came to mind that I realized that in the Bible, King Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. And I've tried like I've fought astrological terms before, like the zodiacal terms, and I people think that astrology is wrong, is evil, and it's not a good thing. It's not something to indulge into or delve into. But all the signs of the zodiac that we learn about in astrology, I'm not an astrologer, I just think about it a bit. All the signs of it, they are actually all in the Bible as well. And the Jewish people, they know it also. And as such, it's mentioned in the book of Job, in the latter part of the book of Job. And the Jewish name for the astrological science is the Mazzaroth or Mazzaroth, which means crowns. Just like there are 12 months in a year, there are 12 signs, 12 crowns, 12 Mazzaroth. And the interesting thing about such is that Jacob, he had 12 sons, from Reuben all the way down to Benjamin. And the order of the astrological signs, the zodiac, is in the beginning of the year, there's Capricorn, there's Aquarius, there is Pisces, then there's Aries, then there's Taurus, then there's Gemini, then there's Cancer, then there's Leo, then there's Virgo, then there's Libra, then there's Sagittarius. Then there's sorry. There's Virgo, there's Libra, then there's then there's Scorpio, then there's Sagittarius. That's the 12. And in the middle of them, there's Gemini, Cancer, and Leo. Those are the three that I'm focusing on. So Gemini really just means twins. The Gemini twins. And I believe that each of the 12 sons of Jacob, they represent every single one of those signs. And there's actually a 13th one that recurs every once in 4 or 5 years or so. But for most years, there's 12 in a year. But every 5th year, I believe, there's a 13th one counted for 1 week. And then it returns back to how it was. Because it was originally 13. But when they changed the calendar, they reverted it just to 12 for most years. So in the middle of the year, there's Gemini, there's Cancer, and there's Leo. And these are the three that I'm thinking about. So in the Bible, King Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. And if you read when Benjamin was born in Genesis, first Benjamin's mother, Rachel, birthed him and then died. But when she birthed him, she called him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. But then when Jacob knew that his son had been born, he said, no, I won't call my son Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. I'll call him Benjamin, son of my right hand. So, like Gemini, it's like Benjamin has two personalities, two names, two aspects, Ben-Oni and Benjamin. And in the start, Gemini, they always say that Gemini has two sides, a peaceful side and a fighter warrior side. So when I was dwelling on all those things, I realized that King Saul, having preceded King David, and King David and King Solomon being like Julius Caesar and Augustus. It's like taking because Julius Caesar is born in July. The month is named after him. And Augustus, the month of August, represents him. So I don't know when King David was born. I don't know when King Solomon was born. But the idea is that these ideas match. And going back further on King Saul, King Saul, like I said, was of the tribe of Benjamin, which you can imagine represents the star of Gemini, which precedes Leo, which precedes Cancer. And so it's like in the middle of the zodiacal sign, there are three signs: Gemini, Cancer, and Leo, which can represent rulers or kingly stars, kingly signs. So when I realized that King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin and could represent the first of the three, the first part of the scenario, that idea made sense. So I said, well, since July and August match on Julius Caesar and Augustus, was there something similar to the Israel idea with the Roman Empire? And then I remembered what I was reading in the first chapter of this book, how Julius Caesar eventually came into power. And I realized that there was a similar idea, because before Julius Caesar became the chief ruler of Rome, he set up what was called a triumvirate, which means the rule of three. And that triumvirate, in it was the richest man in Rome, Crassus, and then Pompey, who was very similar to Julius Caesar, and then Julius Caesar himself. But not too long after the triumvirate was made, Crassus died, and then it was Pompey and Julius Caesar. So in that idea, it was like two were ruling the nation, two were power sharing, just like the idea of Gemini being two. So the thought kind of clicked that not like in a clever sense, it's like Rome was ruled by two before Julius Caesar took over, and then before Augustus. So then that idea clicked in my mind that, yeah, there is something to this. That before the reign of Julius Caesar and before Augustus, it was Julius Caesar and Pompey. So Julius Caesar and Pompey ruling together. It's like the twins. Pompey being one side and Julius Caesar being another side. And then going deeper on the thought, I realized that there were even more similarities than that. Being that the relationship between Pompey and Julius Caesar was one of constant warfare, because they were no longer at peace. And that King David and King Saul, before King David was the chief ruler, because King Saul was king first, and Pompey was also ruler before Julius Caesar actually came by. He was chief before Caesar rose in power. So King Saul reigned first. And then when God got angry with King Saul and said, I'll give the kingdom to your neighbor, and anointed King David to become ruler. Whilst King Saul was still ruling, David was a rightful ruler. The two of them were always fighting, combating, until King Saul eventually died. But in the same sense, Pompey and Julius Caesar were always in a civil war because they fell apart. And what's interesting is that when King Saul died, King David did not celebrate. He honored him like an equal. And what's interesting is that also when how Pompey died was that when Pompey and Julius Caesar were having their civil war, and they were chasing each other down through this part of the empire and that part of the empire. Cleopatra and her brother, who were in Egypt, were also contesting against each other. And what happened was, they also knew that Pompey and Julius Caesar were fighting against each other. So when Pompey was coming down to Egypt, Cleopatra's brother, knowing, which is actually exactly how King Saul died as well, knowing that Pompey was coming, knew that Julius Caesar was more favored one, the stronger one. He went and killed Pompey, which is also how King Saul died. When King Saul's army was defeated, and King Saul had died. This King Saul died by suicide. He killed himself. But when King David heard about it and was going to hear about it, this Amalekite, knowing that King David was an enemy of King Saul, went and lied and said, "Oh, I killed your enemy, I killed King Saul." And when King David heard that he killed that Amalekite because he respected King Saul, in the same way, Cleopatra's brother, who was chief ruler, killed Pompey and wanted to show it off to Caesar so he can get Caesar's favor. So he can get Caesar's favor. But when Caesar saw that he had killed Pompey, instead of him being happy, instead of him being excited, he was sad and he mourned and lamented for him because he had great respect for Pompey. And then from that point onwards, he went and associated with Cleopatra, and they had their relationship there. And he married Cleopatra and went back to Rome and sacked and such. And even the idea of Cleopatra and Caesar also correlate to King David and Bathsheba, their affair, because the Romans also didn't like that. They didn't like a pagan queen being queen of their nation, and as such, also King David, he had Bathsheba by adultery, so they should never have been together. So before Caesar's reign, before Augustus' reign, there were Pompey and there was Caesar, the two of them vying for power, until Caesar eventually overcame, won against Pompey, and became the only ruler. See, you've noticed that these stories pretty much reflect almost perfectly between each other. The story of Caesar to Augustus, and the story of King David to Solomon, and Saul to David to Solomon. They pretty much match and mirror almost perfectly. These two nations seem to be behaving like one nation. So yeah, the idea clicks in my mind that the three middle stars or signs in the zodiac, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo, all produce very powerful rulers, all produce very strong men, and they all kind of evade each other. That was like the flow-on effect of these two kingdoms, these two nations. It's like this. It's like when Gemini flows to Cancer, Cancer flows to Leo. That's like the flow-on effect of the flow of their power, how they transferred. So in Israel, it was first King Saul to King David to Solomon, who made the nation very great. And in Rome, it was like Pompey and Caesar, or Pompey to Caesar, to Augustus, who also made the nation very great. Because King Saul's time in office was spent fighting. King David's time was spent fighting wars all the time, sorting each other out. The King Solomon's time was a time of peace. In the same way, Pompey and Julius Caesar fought and fought and fought. But when it came to Augustus, it was peace. And on a deeper note, when it came to Augustus, whom I've compared to King Solomon, if you know the story of King Solomon, you know that when David made Solomon his heir, David had another son, Adonijah, who was the second son of his favorite wife, or his most beloved son who died, who, before King Solomon could become king, exalted himself and made himself the king of Israel, and went about trying to usurp that power that wasn't given to him. Then in the same sense, when Julius Caesar died, his friend Mark Antony usurped the authority that Caesar gave to Augustus Octavian to make it like he was the successor and not honor the wish of Caesar. So those two kind of balance. So I went past my own vanity and realized there was actually a real clear spiritual principle between these stories. That the Roman Empire, or the beginning of the Roman Empire, and the founding of the Jewish nation pretty much correlated toe to toe, like doing one thing. And like I said before, I'd always seen like Julius Caesar like a very admirable person, someone I greatly respected. And I also, for whatever reason I hadn't thought of it, but I used to think of him like just like King David as well. And through my meditations, I realized that I was right. The two of them were pretty much opposite ends of the same thing. And to make matters worse, I'll give you one more mystery. Do you know why doctors give cesareans when women are having birth and they cut open the stomach? They do that because that's how Julius Caesar was born. That's the truth. But on an even stranger note, do you know that the Jews have this mystery or this belief that when King David was to be born, he was born a very sickly child. He would have died just right then and there. But according to them, when Adam had fallen, God showed him a vision of all that would be of his future lineage. And as God was showing him one thing after another, all the generations, he came across a boy who was to die at his birth. And he loved that child and said, let me give him 70 years of my life. That's why Adam, they say, lived to be 930. And would you believe it? King David died at exactly 70 years old from strange causes. So putting those two mysteries together, there is another match as well. So their parallels and their comparisons are just way too amazing, way too strange to perceive. That the foundations of these two nations, or the Roman Empire and the Jewish nation, pretty much seem to correlate, like parallel. And another thing too, like before the Roman Empire collapsed, it too was made two different nations. There was Eastern Rome, there was Western Rome. Like what happened to Israel because of King Solomon's sin. So the parallels are obvious and plain. There's a bit of astrological or divine dealings from on high guiding the two nations. There are parallels and such and such. And I noticed through like what I was reasoning and learning and discovering that was probably why when when you see the months of the years and when you see the zodiac signs, when they start and when they end, every single zodiac sign will feature mainly in one month, but it will take a little bit of the month before. So I realized through that maybe God was trying to say through such signs that these signs are linked and connected just like they share months. But yeah, that was my personal relation. That was what I've learned today through my reading of this book and some meditating. But I also had a question in my mind, which was, why is it that these two nations parallel? Because the parallels are pretty much perfect. They're not exact. They can't be exact. They're not the same thing, but they're pretty much perfect. This matches this, that thing matches that, and such and such. It goes pretty much simply. So I had a question in my mind. Why is it that they match? What's the similarity between them that the foundations of either match perfectly with the foundations of the other? And by the end of the day, it clicked me. Do you know why they parallel? Because spiritually, they're the same. Just like the kingdom of Israel birthed the Messiah, just like the kingdom of Judah birthed the Messiah, just like faith is of the Jews. So when the Roman Empire had reached its peak, the faith of the Jews, the faith of the kingdom of Israel became their own. Don't forget the Roman Catholic Church. Christianity went to every single part of the world because of the Roman Empire. So God, knowing ahead of time that Rome was to one day serve like a second Israel, ordained that its foundation will pretty much be exactly the same, on a different term, but exactly the same, which is an amazing thought. The power of God to orchestrate things so majestically. God is amazing. God is all powerful. God is great. He knows what He's doing. He knows where He's leading this world. I pray that everyone finds faith in the one true God. I pray that everyone follows the Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that His faith becomes all our faiths. And I pray that we trust Him with all of our hearts. God bless you all. And remember, don't read books like this unless you know what you're doing. Sometimes you're not worth it. Bye.